While we often talk a lot about goal setting, and don't get me wrong, goal setting is great. Absolutely love goal setting. There's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement that comes from setting our goals for the new year or new quarter or whatnot. And I think it's just that kind of like promise of a new us, right? It gets us enthusiastic, excited, motivated to do things. But motivation doesn't stick around long. Not really. I mean, given the fact that I'm pretty sure it's like January 10th is official death day for most people's New Year's resolutions and goals. Notably, given the fact that the year is 365, sometimes 66 days long, 10 days out of that for your motivation to fall off, not great. But what is better than goal setting is goal planning. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. All right. We're going to be looking at how you can take a larger goal or project that you're working on and break it down so that you can actually take action, actually get things done, and get that feeling of accomplishment come the end of the goal with actually hitting the milestones that you're hoping for. Okay. If you're going to be working along with me, make sure that you've got pen and some paper out. We're going to be breaking things down together. I'm going to just use an example goal. So if you have some goal examples, let me know what it is you're planning on working on. Maybe we'll pick one of those. I would like to note, though, that in terms of the stuff we're talking about today, this is all stuff that we talk about over in Epic Goals. Epic Goals is the course and community that I have around goal planning, setting, getting, and such. And if you wanted to learn more information about the entire of the process, not just the stuff we're talking about today, then you can jump over there. There's, in theory, a link in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen. But that being said, let's get into it. So we're going to look at 3 techniques today that I use to break down bigger goals. So you have your goal, write down goal. But oftentimes this isn't just like a one and done thing. Otherwise it wouldn't really be a goal. It would just be a task or I don't know, maybe a very, very, very small project. I wouldn't even go as far to say it's a project, though. It would just be a task if it was a one and done. So for this goal, how do we actually do it? How do we get to that end point? What kind of things can we do to make that process easier, make it more likely that it happens? So in terms of the 3 techniques that we're going to be looking at, this is all about how we break that down so that we can take action, so that we can get it done, so that we can move the needle in the right direction towards the milestone we're hoping for. The first technique. Technique number 1. We're going to talk about what this kind of goal is in this hypothetical sense in a second. But the first one is what I call frequency buckets. So we're going to write that down. Frequency buckets. Alrighty, you got a goal for me? Let's see, you're writing a serial fiction of 60 episodes. Wow, that sounds like an impressive feat. Yep, goals, returning to work after maternity leave. That's a great goal. Completing 4 creative courses. Nice. Yeah, example goal, publish 9 books in 2026. Goal to stop smoking. You guys have great goals. I love this. Alrighty, so we're going to go with a publishing goal just because I feel like that's one that came up repeatedly. Publish X books. Okay? Now, if we're thinking about the frequency buckets that come with publish X books, we need to think about what do I need to do once? What do I need to do repeatedly? And not just repeatedly, but what do I need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly kind of basis? Obviously, this really depends on what style of planning you typically gravitate towards. If you do a lot of monthly planning, then one of your frequency buckets will be monthly. For me, I use cyclic planning, so it'll be during each cycle, what do I need to do? But we're taking the potential, swamp of tasks, and we're just organizing our thinking a little bit by thinking about how frequent those things need to be done. So for frequency, I would think about once. So this is a task that you only complete one time. It's not like you do this every single time that you need to start working on this goal, or every single time you tackle a new part of the goal. So for instance, maybe like a once for published books would be like picking the title. Like you probably only pick the title once, unless you go through, a lot of workshopping and such, but those individual stages would be one-off tasks as well. We can think about quarterly. If you're thinking about doing this goal over a longer period of time, or one that you think is going to take you a really long time to work on, maybe there's something you just need to do 4 times a year. That could be checking in with some kind of analytic. That could be, updating your analysis of statistics around something. Oftentimes when I'm thinking quarterly, it's about stat finding, that type thing. But we also have monthly or cyclic. What do I have to do on that type of a basis? Maybe that's planning out your work. Maybe that is going and checking in on the progress of something or something like that. When we get into the weeds of things, this is where we kind of are thinking about the stuff that really populates our daily and weekly task lists, because it's the stuff we need to do weekly and the stuff we need to do daily. Now, different goals are going to have different combinations of these things. We're going to zoom you in a little bit so that then we can see our beautiful list. Excellent. Different goals are going to require different combinations. Some goals are going to be a whole heap of one and done type steps. So, for instance, if we're thinking about the book publishing type deal, maybe there are like a lot of one-off steps that need to work towards that thing, like, picking the title, setting aside your writing days for any given period or whatnot if you're planning to get it done in just that period. It could be, meeting with the person who's going to be publishing it or finding a publisher or whatnot. You don't have to find a publisher every time you sit down to work on your book, right? Whereas something that you need to do a lot more frequently would be the actual writing process. That could be having your weekly writing sessions or daily writing sessions, those type of things. Whereas if we think about something that has, a lot more daily actions, that could be like a long-term health goal, right? Long-term health goal in the sense of, on a daily basis, I want to be tracking my food intake. On a daily basis, I want to be doing some kind of movement for the body. On a daily basis, I want to be intaking a certain amount of water or something like that. But as said, different goals, different type of frequency buckets, but the frequency buckets can help us organize our thinking, okay? So what I would literally do for this is that I would write these headers on a page, like once quarterly, monthly, and just list out anything and everything I can think of that is going to fall into those frequencies to work on the thing I want to work on, all right? Ooh, question. How does one adapt this to your personal timeline? You have an illness and it means that I keep odd hours compared to the 9 to 5. Right now, we're not necessarily thinking about mapping it to particular time slots on your calendar and such, but I guess what I like to think about is don't change the goal, you change the timeline for it. Or don't lower your expectations for yourself, just pad out how long it's going to take you to work on the thing. So, for instance, if you have a really kind of free calendar, you have a lot of available time to work on things, and you know that you can use that time really effectively to get stuff done in a prompt manner, then maybe your timeline for publish a book is like half a year. I don't know. I haven't published a book, but just thinking about it in terms of something that still seems realistic, but is a little bit more condensed. Whereas for other people who are trying to just find pockets of time to try and do these kind of things, maybe their timeline is looking a little bit more like a year to 2 years, that type of deal. It's not kind of lowering our expectations for ourselves, because oftentimes if you're setting a goal, it's because it's something you genuinely want, unless you've given into some kind of societal pressure and you're just setting goals because you feel like you should, which is also something to watch out for. But because you've set this goal for yourself, because you've said, yeah, this is something I want, we don't want to just go, oh, well, I quote, quote, only have 6 months to work on it or 3 months to work on it or whatnot, so I'll just make my expectations for it lower. No, just push the deadline out a little bit. Give yourself the time you need, because not everybody is going to have the same available time. But anywho, so first tip, frequency buckets, okay? For your goal, what do you have to do once? What's a one-off task? What do you have to do quarterly? What do you have to do monthly or cyclic? And then those weekly and daily things that are a bit more kind of like habits, I suppose. If we get into the daily space, that is kind of that habit building, like carving out time to write. And that could be at a particular time every day or anything like that. But what you can often run into with this is that once you start to populate your frequency buckets, you can start to get really heavy in kind of this lower end of the scale and get a little overwhelmed. Like if we think about it in terms of that health-related goal, there are plenty of ways you can work on a health-related goal. There are plenty of ways you can work on most goals. But if you start to really pad out that thing that you're supposed to do daily, like that really long list of daily tasks, that can just kind of send us into a little bit of a panic. Okay, cool, awesome. All right, so here's like 16 things that I'm supposed to do on a daily basis. And this is where we get out our pen and we start to cross things out, okay? Just because you can do something to work on a goal doesn't mean it has to be done, right? There are some key, integral parts of it that we're going to write down, while we're doing our brainstorming, that do have to happen, but not all of them have to happen. Right? So if you start to get overwhelmed by your list, you're like, oh my gosh, there is way too many things here. Just start crossing stuff out. It's all good. And it might be that eventually, as you get underway with your goal work, as you start to undertake working on your goal, then maybe you have a little bit more bandwidth, a little more capacity to go back and do those things. But right now we're just writing ideas down, right? This is very safe, okay? It's all good to write stuff down and decide later on that you're like, no, that action step either like doesn't need to be done, or I think I'll just put it off till later, so I'll just cross it out for now. We don't want to kind of like scare ourselves in the first stage and be like, oh God, way too much, way too hard, and then not even make any progress, okay? But tactic one, frequency buckets. Just organize your brainstorming, organize your thinking by considering the frequency with which those things are going to happen. If you get overwhelmed by how many tasks you have in any one of those buckets, just start to cross out the things that aren't really going to be as impactful. Right, we'll just get rid of those. We'll focus on them later. Okay. Second technique, and this one is definitely one of my favorites. This one is backwards mapping. Write that one down. Backwards mapping. Now, this is mainly for those types of goals that are a little bit more project-based. They have a kind of set sequence of steps that require happening. They have to happen in a particular order to get to the end outcome you're hoping for. So, for instance, like publishing the book, you're probably not going to publish the book before you write the book, those kind of things. That's a bit of an extreme case, but in any goal that you're working on or any kind of project-based goal in particular, there are going to be parts of that that are sequential, that do build off each other, where you have to do one thing before you start another. The way that we use backwards mapping, though, is not by starting at the start, although it would be a very good place to start, but instead thinking about the end outcome and working our way backwards from that. So this is the thing that needs to happen last, or this is the accomplishment that we're hoping for. What's going to happen directly before that? Right? What is the step that will happen like last in the process? Even if that's just like starting the race to then cross the finish line type thing. Sure, before you start the race, there's a whole bunch of training that has to happen, but starting the race is going to be the last thing that you actively do before you cross that finish line, right? So if we think about that, what is the step that comes before that one? And we just keep working our way backwards. What happens before that? What happens before that? What happens before that? Oftentimes when I do backwards mapping, I keep it kind of general, kind of broad. I'm not looking for like the tiny, 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 tiny actions just yet, mainly because, again, I don't want to overwhelm myself, because if I get overwhelmed, I won't start. And if I don't start, then I will not reach my goal, and then I will be bummed out, all right? But if we think about that in terms of the, publishing of the books or whatnot, especially if you're thinking about publishing multiple books in this time frame, then the step that's going to happen before you have officially check in the box published all of those X books, we're just going to say nine books, then that's going to be publishing the ninth book. The last thing that you will do will be publishing the ninth book. Okay, so that would be the thing that happens before that. But what's going to happen before you publish that ninth book? Are there the final checks that have to be done? Do you have to make sure that you apply the feedback from your beta readers? Is there anything around kind of marketing that you might want to do to build hype around the publishing of the ninth book or whatnot, right? Yeah, backwards mapping helps put everything neatly in order and evenly get separated out, beginning goals into smaller goals. Exactly. I love backwards mapping for just being able to really think through the process and being able to kind of see given the fact that it's called backwards mapping, it gives you a map to follow. It's giving you the kind of journey that you're going to be taking through this goal. But rather than starting where you're currently at, which oftentimes, if we're kind of just working on a new goal and the goal's kind of big and it's daunting and we're excited about it, but it's scary, we're like, cool, where do I start? That's tricky. Figuring out a starting point is hard. Working backwards from an end outcome and kind of reverse engineering the goal, that's a little bit more approachable, and that is why backwards mapping is one of my favorites. Okay, so what you might find during your backwards mapping is that not everything is going to be linear. And that's totally okay, because oftentimes a lot of goals that we're working on aren't just one and then the next and then the next and then the next. They're the kind of things where multiple parts could work at the same time as each other, could be going in tandem to get to the end outcome. So maybe if you're trying to publish, 9 books or whatnot, but they're not actually part of the same series, maybe you could be working on them at the same time. Do I recommend this? Maybe, maybe not. I haven't written a book, but if you can kind of, compartmentalize your thinking and think in these two separate worlds or genres or whatever that you're trying to write, then possibly you could work on multiple things at the same time. So maybe it's not a last things last, and then the thing that happens before, the thing that happens before, the thing that happens before, but multiple chains that are kind of working towards that end outcome. So it's like, oh, well, before, before, before. Okay. We kind of think about this in terms of like another example, maybe like an event planning type situation. If one of your goals is to plan a getaway for your friends or something, you're planning like a reading retreat getaway or something. Well, that sounds fun. I'll probably try to do that next year. But there are multiple parts that are going to go into that. For instance, the actual kind of planning and booking of just like the key dates around where we're going, where we're staying and stuff. Yeah, that's probably something that needs to happen first. But then once that's kind of set in stone, the other stuff could happen in tandem with each other. I can be planning food on one kind of branch and activities on another branch and planning our reading lists on another kind of branch, because those branches don't actually rely on each other. Like what I'm having for dinner on the second night doesn't really dictate the books I'm going to read, if that kind of makes sense. So we can kind of break it down into these different separate chains that are going to intend towards the end outcome we're hoping for. Yeah. You find backwards mapping so hard you still can't figure out the steps. Give me your example. What's the end outcome you're looking for? We'll workshop it a little bit. Also, let me know. What are we drinking today? I'm having water because the body is hydrated, katink. But I'd love to hear that you guys are drinking something a little more exciting than water, maybe. Unless it's water, hydration is important too. My straw fell into my bottle. It won't come out. I'm like, now I'm parched. Please, water, come back. Alrighty, team hydration. Tried it last year for something and never did it again. Very fair. And this is also good to note that, like, just because we're talking about these techniques of, frequency buckets and backwards mapping and such, does not mean that I apply them to every single goal I'm working on. These are the ones that I kind of come back to when I need that extra assistance or extra help. But sometimes, especially if it's a goal you kind of had in your mind for a while, you've probably done a little bit of background research on it. You maybe know just like innately the kind of stuff that will go into working on that thing. So you don't necessarily have to jump in and use these techniques specifically to help you out. But if you're really stuck, you're really stumped, you're like, okay, cool, I want to work on this thing, but how does one even? Then these are the techniques that I come back to. All right. But no, you give me that end outcome that you're working on or thinking about, and we're going to try and workshop that one together. In the meantime, though, while we're moving on with our bits and pieces here, the third technique, and this is one that actually, regardless of which type of goal I'm working on, this is the one that is the most necessary. Okay, so if you're going to take anything away from this video, make sure that you take away this point. But that one is what we're going to call action check, step check. All right. Oftentimes when I'm talking about a goal, I refer to action steps, okay? Action steps are the things that you do in order to actually work on the goal, to make progress on it. That's the stuff that gets you from A to B to C to D to E, okay? But oftentimes the issue that people run into when they're trying to write their action steps or write their list of tasks that need to be done is that they aren't actually action steps, okay? So if we take the term action step, all right, we'll write it down again just for the sake of completeness. Action, step. The first part of this is action. Yeah, I know, I sound like a dick, but stay with me for a second, okay? Action, doing word, verbs, okay? We need to make it doable. If I'm thinking about doable, what I like to think about is, could I wake up in the morning and just decide to do this? Like, time willing and ability willing and all of that kind of stuff. But is it something that you could actually do? Yeah. So when we're thinking about writing an action step, we want to make sure that it starts with some kind of verb or an action word. So verb. For instance, if I were to wake up and say, oh yeah, I want to have $100,000 in my savings account or something like that. That's not a goal I'm currently working towards. Well, I guess, yeah, slowly but surely working towards. But anyways, I want to have $100,000 in my bank account. Could I wake up one morning and just decide to do that? No, I can't just do having $100,000. What I could do, though, is put money in my savings. What I could do is, review my budget to see any kind of spending areas that I could cut down on a little bit because I'm overspending in them or something. What I could do is research investing or something like that. Those are the things that I have the ability to take action on. I have some kind of choice in the matter, right? Things that you can make a decision and then just do the thing. That's the first part. Is it doable? The second part, funnily enough, is step. It needs to be small. Small, all right? We don't want to make a staircase of, quote, steps, where the steps are so dang massive that we get to the first one and go, nope, can't reach that. My legs are too short, all right? You could get stilts, I guess, but I don't like being that high off the ground. It sounds scary, okay? We need to make sure that the things we're putting on our actions list, these things that we're breaking our goal down into, are little, all right? We want to make sure that they are things that do not feel too daunting, don't feel too overwhelming or whatnot. But there is a balancing act here, okay? We need our steps to be small so that we can actually climb the staircase, because if they're too big, we won't be able to take the steps. But we also need to make sure they're not so small that the staircase is just a ridiculous laundry list of teeny tiny things to do, and we get overwhelmed just looking at the list. Even though the items are, small, achievable type things, my foot can't fit on there. We want the Goldilocks staircase, all right? We want the size that is just right. What I like to think about in terms of this is, can I do it in under 30 minutes, all right? So let's say 30 minutes or less. You could also break this down into 10 minutes if you prefer, or 5 minutes. It really depends on what your tolerance for a task is. But if you find yourself procrastinating on something, something you're supposed to do for your goal, something you've said, yeah, okay, this is my action step, this is the next action I'm supposed to take, and you're not doing it, just do the action, check, step, check. Is it actually actionable? Is it doable? Does it have a verb? It starts with a verb. It's usually a good action step. And is it a step? Is it small? Is it something that isn't too daunting, doesn't feel like a little project and a half itself? If it does feel like it's going to take multiple tasks to do, then this is not an action step. This is an action steps or a project, effectively. Okay? So, in terms of the 3 things that I like to do, organizing my thinking into frequency buckets, because it just helps to organize all of the brainstorming and the kind of like swamp of tasks that you could do in working on a goal. Backwards mapping, start with the end outcome that you're aiming for. Start with that kind of the final form, the last milestone that you're hoping for. What is going to happen directly before that? What is going to happen directly before that one? And give yourself this kind of like chain of things. What I also find for this is that if you keep it kind of general, kind of vague, that can kind of just scaffold your thinking and you can go in with a bit of detail. But once you start putting that detail in, number 3, action, check. Step, check, right? We want to make sure it's doable and it's small for each of the things that you're saying, oh yeah, I'm going to do that to work on my goal, because if it's not small, if it's not actionable, it won't happen. And I want it to happen, and you want it to happen. This is your goal, right? You wouldn't set a goal that you don't actually want to work on. That sounds silly. Alrighty, let's go back and have a look at what we were talking about before. So the end outcome example is making a dress when you have no motivation. You tried this for a year now. That's valid. Okay, so first of all, we're going to ask, is this a goal that you actually have? And I know that probably sounds a little silly, but are we holding on to this goal because it's something that former us was excited about and former us was enthusiastic about, but current us actually isn't as enthusiastic anymore? It is all good to let go of goals that aren't aligned with who you are anymore. For instance, I used to have a goal around hand lettering and becoming like way better at my calligraphy. But eventually that want for myself passed. And I, after years of not putting in the effort to learn and not investigating how to get better at it, I came to the realization that that was just something that past me wanted to do, and current me wasn't actually all that curious about it anymore. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with your goal, but if it has been years and you've kind of, put that on the back burner repeatedly, we can kind of use our track record or history with the thing to show us that maybe that isn't a priority for us anymore. But if you decided, no, actually, this is a priority for me, I do still want to work on it, then what needs to happen? What is the backwards mapping that comes with this? Okay? So, if we think about like dress made, we'll put that in, dress made. That is our end outcome that we're targeting towards. Put a little box around it. We'll put some little confetti lines. Yay! All right, we did the thing. This is so messy. Even working with the grid paper, it is so messy. But we get the idea. Okay, so what is the last thing that happens before the dress gets made? This would be something like final touches, yeah? So, final touches. So that would be making sure that any of the threads have been trimmed back if there was any kind of like, end of a sewing piece. Or it could be, making sure that it is presentable. I like Cheryl's idea, iron the dress type of a deal. Okay, so final touches could be ironing, it could be the thread trimming, it could be any kind of like embellishments that you want to add. If there's anything like particular that you want to add on to that, that could be like writing your name on a tag type deal. I don't know if you're going to sew a tag into your clothing, like choices, because I usually just cut mine out. But it could be some kind of like, personalization that goes with that. Personalization. Okay. But what happens before that? What happens before we actually get to the final touches? Okay. I'm really going to highlight the fact that I know very limited things about dressmaking. So if I put a horse before a cart in the wrong order or whatnot, just know it's because I'm doing this on the fly. But before final touches, before we get to the part where we're like, cool, we've done the whole thing, maybe it would be the like hemming or like overlocking or like depending on how you want to finish your dress, it could be that kind of thing. I'm just going to write hemming because that feels like a thing that people would do. So making sure that then you don't have any clean, what's a clean edge called? Raw edges or anything like that. It could be anything like that. I don't know the official terminology, but hopefully we get the idea. What happens before the hemming? It could be just like the kind of general construction type deals. I'm going to do very broad brushstrokes with this, but we're going to say construction in terms of like sewing your pieces together. So pieces together. And then before you actually sew the pieces together, you might need to make individual pieces. Depends on the structure of the dress, obviously. If you have sleeves, then, making the individual sleeves before you attach it to the body part and all of that type things. So pieces and piecing. Before you get to that, you probably need to cut the fabric. Cut fabric. Before we cut the fabric, we probably need a pattern. We might even need just the fabric picked, and we might need the pattern either made or sourced or purchased or that type of a thing. All right. Before you get to the pattern, maybe you want to figure out what style you want. Right. Before you figure out the style you want, maybe you want to do some research for inspiration. Do not let yourself get stuck in the research phase, right? The research phase is the one that can take up the most time. It's a never-ending like hole of overwhelm to get yourself sucked into because there are just so many options. But if we think about this in the very general list of terms, right? Okay, so you do your research, you're figuring out what kind of things you might want to do to make this dress. You find a style that you're like or you're curious about. You're like, cool, I think I'll go and do that. You go and either make or find a pattern for the dress that you want to pursue. And then based on that pattern, based on how it's going to be constructed, then we need to go and pick the fabric. Somewhere in here, you should probably also take your measurements so you know how much fabric to buy. Because once you pick the fabric, you can't just go and cut it right away. You usually have to purchase it. Otherwise, people get a little annoyed at you for running around with scissors, just hacking fabric off pieces in the fabric shop. No, not going to do that. But again, this is just a general map. This is not those really bite-sized, tiny little things that we're looking for when it comes to doing our action check, step check, right? This is not this stage. This is just making the general map, okay? But does that kind of make sense, right? We started at that end outcome. What comes before that? What comes before that? What comes before that? Oftentimes when it comes to backwards mapping, while it is called backwards mapping, I will work from both ends to a middle point, all right? But yeah, yes, your new criminal life running around with scissors, but be careful, don't trip. So yeah, maybe set yourself a mini goal to find a pattern you love in X time so it doesn't seem as big, right? What we can also do here is that If the goal is to make a dress, but you don't, and I'm not saying this is you, but this could be somebody else. It could, for instance, be me, who knows nothing about sewing. If the dream is to make a dress, we don't have to make the dream dress first. We can do an ooch. We can make a nightgown, all right? Because at the end of the day, if the nightgown kind of sucks, the only person who really sees it is me and probably Vogel, and he probably won't care, to be honest. He's just like, turn the light off, we're going to sleep, kind of a thing. So maybe just like lower the bar for the first version of this. And then once you have the skills, you've got some more skin in the game, you've built up some motivation, momentum for yourself or whatnot, then you can make the better one. Yeah, I want it to be perfect. Valid. But you know what? Perfect doesn't come in the first layer, oftentimes. I like to think of goal work as a watercolor painting or a painting like, from those old impressionist eras or whatever, where everything was built up in very tiny layers, as opposed to acrylic painting where it's just like blobs of paint on a canvas, all right? Oftentimes an acrylic painting with blobs of paint on a canvas isn't usually my final form that's like a perfect for me, whereas those old oil paintings where they do the really fine layers and such and build things up over time, those ones, like, you get the real depth of character and the realism, and it's beautiful, and I love that. And I think about goal work in a similar way, right? We want perfect, but perfect is going to come from practice, yeah? Or at least we're going to get damn near closer than just like trying to make everything from the get-go be the absolute perfect steps. just spitting truths, and it's annoying. Apologies. I'm sorry. I should have asked. Do we just want to vent, or do we actually want solutions? Tink. All right. So, having a look at another one, because we love to look at examples. So, what would backwards mapping look like with losing weight? It's all circular somewhat, hard to predict which steps lead to success. Maybe we could touch on that again later. Alrighty, later is now. Let's do a thing. So, if we're thinking about backwards mapping for a weight loss goal, all right, we'll put that in a box. We'll try and make the box a little nicer than the last one. I apologize to the dressmaking box. It got away from me. But, so, weight loss. Now, if we think about the making of a dress, this was very much a project-based goal, right? There is a very set end outcome. It is you have the dress in hand type deal. Weight loss as a goal is more of a kind of, strive towards and then maintain type goal. Oftentimes, you don't just lose weight and then kind of revert back to your old habits. Well, a lot of people do, and that's when they get on like yo-yo diets and such. We don't want that for you, okay? So if we're thinking about the kind of sequence of steps that have to happen to get to a weight loss goal, it's more so those kind of regular inputs that get you to the point that you want to be at, okay? So one of the regular inputs that's going to come for a weight loss goal would be something like movement. Another input that is going to work towards a weight loss goal is going to be, eating patterns, or like, the kind of types of food you're eating, or the amount of food you're eating, or like, that whole calorie deficit type thing. Yeah. So we're going to put in food. Another aspect that is going to support weight loss is going to be hydration. All right. The body can't do anything with fat reserves if it doesn't have water to be able to do the process. Does she know the biological process? No, but she knows the water's important, so we're chucking that on there as well. There are other aspects of weight loss, but I think that really the main one that is going to be kind of not necessarily the most important for people, but typically the most kind of impactful, I suppose, is the food aspect, right? If we're thinking about it in terms of weight loss comes from a calorie deficit, it's that idea of calories in, calories out. And sure, exercise does burn calories, but your body burns more calories just being a body. So if we just focus on the food aspect, okay? So the regular input for the weight loss is the food intake, right? And intaking food that is going to nourish the body, is going to be good for the body. The body is like, yes, please, I love this, right? You're giving me my nutrients, but you're not overburdening me with these calories that I can't use or whatnot, right? So based on that, based on the fact that it's the food aspect, what needs to come before this? Or what do we need to do in order to get this food input, quote, right? Okay? So if we think about it in terms of most goals start in a research phase. The worst phase. This is where good goal work goes to die, I swear, all right? Because the research phase can be never ending. It can be the thing that gets us sucked into that like perfectionistic mindset, right? Of being like, oh, I need the perfect plan to get started. If I don't have the perfect plan, then my action taking is going to be like ineffective, or it's going to be, done in a way that is inefficient type of a deal. But you know what's even more inefficient than getting started with imperfect action is never starting, because you're just constantly researching. Right? That is the most inefficient way to work on a goal. But right, I digress. So there's going to be possibly a research stage. Researching of like the types of foods that you could start to bring into your diet, swaps that you could make with things that you have been overindulging in but you don't feel are aligned with your health goals or whatnot. It could be research around how to develop kind of like more mindfulness practices around your eating or whatnot, so you are more conscious of your hunger cues and things like that. Depends on what your kind of problem area is when it comes to like the weight loss goal, right? So there's a research phase, there's an action phase, and then there's the outcome that we're looking for, okay? So we take the research, we take the action. Based on the action, we then learn things, and then that will probably inform our practice moving forward. Is this vague? Abso-heckin-lutely. And that's because a weight loss goal is not a project-based goal, not in the same way that dressmaking is, right? Right? Weight loss goal is more of that kind of like tend towards and maintain type deal. The oat muffins have helped you with the weight loss so far. I'm glad that you're enjoying your oat muffins. I like an oaty muffin. Yeah, your cat is preventing you from interacting more. He passed out on your lap. Well, I don't want to wake him. That feels rude. But if we think about it in terms of our other sections though, so a movement-based goal, again, we could do some research, we can do some action, and then we will find the one that works for us and we will continue to work with that. So research, action, and then we have our movement input kind of sorted, right? I think about these as kind of, if we're thinking about it in terms of a map, right? I think about weight loss less of in the sense of like a linear type thing, whereas the dressmaking one was more linear. It's like you do the research, you pick the style, you pick the pattern, and a weight loss one is more of diverging paths with cyclic elements. Let's have a look at that, okay? I'm going to zoom you out a little bit so that we can have a little bit more separation between me and the paper. There we go. Point, point. So we think about it in terms of the end outcome of weight loss. And we're going to do this in terms of my one because I think it's a little easier if you speak from personal experience or whatnot. So my aim of like lose weight, very specific, but that's because I don't have a goal weight loss, to be honest. I have a goal feeling in the body, and that's hard to capture with a kind of like value or number or whatnot. But in terms of my weight loss goal, I have some actions that I want to or need to be taking on a daily basis, and those actions don't necessarily all directly relate to each other. But one of those daily actions is walk daily, right? Do I set an expectation around myself as to how much? Not really. I have a set path that I walk, and if I'm walking on my walking pad, I have a set amount of time, but outside of that, not so much. Another thing that I am aiming to do to lose weight is to track my food. And this one doesn't rely on walking. Like I can walk and not track, and I can track and not walk. So those two don't need to be part of the same path. Okay, they're on separate tracks here. Another thing that I am doing in the attempt to lose weight is monitoring my water intake. Not to the extent of, you must get 2 liters of water a day, otherwise you're going to die of dehydration and you're going to gain all this weight because your body can't break down any food. No, not so much. But more so, I'm just trying to aim to start with water first. And that is why we have water, Tink, here with me today, because currently it is like 9:40 in the morning. Okay, so water intake, that is part of it, but it doesn't rely on the others. Like I can intake my water and track my food and have them as completely separate things, right? They don't have to happen because one or the other happens, right? And they're not sequential in the sense that I must track my food and then intake my water or vice versa. Though I do technically track my water intake when I track my food, but that's more of a personal choice than it is something that like has to be relied on each other. Does that make sense? Then another aspect of that is um, actually eating the food. So when it comes to this, I could put it on the track food kind of chain of things. And I guess in that case, it kind of does make sense to go there. So in that case, we would have intake the food. And before we intake the food, we plan the food. And I guess if you want to get quite granular with it, before we intake the food, but after we plan the food, we make the food. Yep. But this is not something that happens once, right? This is a cyclic type thing. So the intaking of food leads to the tracking of food. Once I've tracked the food, I can use the information to help me plan new food. Once I've planned my food, I can make my food. Once I make my food, I can intake my food. I intake my food, then I track my food. Once I track my food, it informs me of my planning of food. So this part is cyclic, all right? This part is something that we do repeatedly, time and time again. It's not a one and done type deal. Okay. Similar idea with like your walking daily. If you were doing just a general movement type thing, or if we change this to a daily exercise, maybe a step that comes before that is finding the exercise that you will actually be willing to do daily, or one that you can lean into and find enjoyment in to an extent where you actually get it done, as opposed to something that feels like a giant slog and then the brain rebels and says, absolutely not, I'm not doing the thing. Yeah, there we go. Stocking the beer cooler. I don't have an exercise problem, I have a chocolate problem. That's fair. That's fair. I understand that. I find that if I have foods like that in my house, I also have a chocolate problem. But I typically don't keep chocolate in my house, so I have less of a chocolate problem. Most of me, it's just like the proximity to foods that I find hard to, I'm not trying to say resist here, because the aim for me is not trying to resist the foods. It's more so just trying to live in a realm where the food exists and I don't feel compelled to eat it on site. Kind of a thing. Seafood diet, you see it, you eat it type deal. But anywho, so this one has that kind of like cyclic part. Water intake, on the other hand, there could be things that come before this. For instance, if you are trying to increase your water intake, but you do not have a vessel that you like to drink water from, then maybe that is something you would need to do first. So, water vessel finding. Right. And then possibly something you need to do before finding the vessel would be researching, the place where all good goals go to die. Okay. So, research, which could also come before planning the food. So, you do the research to plan the food, and then you make the food, you intake the food, you track the food, yada, yada, yada type thing. So, we kind of build up from here. This, though, is not an action plan. This is a backwards map, all right? This is just giving us a bird's eye view of how we could work on a goal. It is not the steps we will actually be taking. This is not a checklist. This is not something we come back to on a daily basis to be like, oh, yep, tick, tick, did my research, tick, tick, did this and that, all right? This is just giving our brain something to look at to kind of organize our thinking. Hopefully that makes sense and helps, right? I know you guys had some questions, but I think I might have missed them. So if you had a question, please just chuck 3 question marks or a couple question marks at the front of your message so that it's a little bit easier for me to pull those out of the chat, all right? But hopefully this has made sense thus far. Like we said, there's the 3 main steps that we're really kind of thinking about when it comes to breaking down the goal, all right? Because setting a goal, absolutely great. Planning a goal, so much better, all right? So the frequency buckets to organize your thinking, backwards mapping to give you a kind of schematic or picture to work with that shows how you're going to be working on the thing, and then checking all of your actions and making sure that they are action steps. They are doable, they are small, all right? Question: at what point do you prepare for possible barriers? This is when I get into the kind of like what I would think of as like the finalized checklist for a goal, or like the sequence of steps that I'm going to be taking. And for any action step that I foresee as being something that I'm going to possibly struggle with, like future me is going to put this off, future me is going to find this difficult, that is where I will bring challenge planning into it. For anybody who doesn't know what challenge planning is essentially planning for challenges. So thinking about the possible challenges that could come up with this thing, what can I do to make it so that I am like mitigating those challenges, or making it so that they're less likely to happen, or making it so that I can kind of like go into facing the challenge with more of a game plan. So, for instance, let's just say that one of the things that I foresee as being difficult is the water intake aspect. Like, I know that I'm the kind of person who, if I'm not like really super conscious about it, I will just go most of a day without having any water. So, what kind of things could I do? How could I design my environment to help me? How can I just make it so that then I'm less likely to forget that that is important to me? So, possible ideas that we could bring with this, like if I'm challenge planning the water intake. So, challenge planning. Maybe I set alarms. Maybe I have like little reminders that go off every hour to be like, hey, are you hydrated? Are you thirsty? The answer is yes, probably. Okay. I could have it so that then I have a vessel that I just really love. You know, maybe the vessel in particular, and I do technically find that it is the vessel. If I don't like the vessel I'm trying to drink water out of, I will not drink water. So maybe that's something. Maybe the real issue that I foresee here is the refilling of the water. So maybe I try and tack on filling my water bottle to some other kind of habit or routine that's already established. Maybe I have a really solid morning routine where it's like, get up, go to the bathroom, get back in bed. And like, I know that that sounds like not solid, but if it's something you do every single day, it might be solid. So maybe we just add in the additional step of taking a sip of water, having a glass of water just in the middle of that. Get up, go to the bathroom, have a glass of water, get back into bed. All right, you're kind of like tucking it into something that's already really routine for you, even if that routine is not something that you're necessarily proud of. Okay, so the challenge planning is just planning for challenges, figuring out what are the possible kind of pitfalls that I might experience, what are the potential downfalls that I will have with this, what has the risk to derail me, and planning in advance for how you're going to tackle that, how you're going to respond to it. If we think about it in terms of like the planning of food or whatnot, if you find that you are not great at planning your meals a week in advance, then don't plan your meals a week in advance. Give yourself like a 3-day meal plan, all right? Because maybe it's just that like you're more of a mood eater. You get to the end of the week and you're like, yeah, I know that like Monday Jess said we were going to have this, but Friday Jess is thinking hot chips, all right? If you make your plans a little bit closer to the day that you're actually going to be doing them, maybe you're going to be more enthusiastic about it, more likely to stick with it. So that could be something you put into your challenge planning, all right? We have a question. I love a question. Would you put the challenge list in the everyday journal? It depends. I find that if I'm going to utilize it, most of the time just thinking it through is sufficient for me. But if we grab out an example, for instance, one of the things that I set for myself when it came to this journal here, all right? So, because this is related to a goal that I had a couple of years ago, this is my 5-year journal. If you haven't been introduced, it's something that I use in theory on a daily basis to just write down some stuff that happened. Yeah. But in knowing that I had tried 5-year journals previously and they hadn't worked for me, one of the things that I set for myself was an implementation intention statement. All right. So it's like essentially, how do you figure you're actually going to get this thing done? Is the long story short of it. And I took that implementation intention statement and I stuck it right in the front of the journal so that I had these things to like past Jess said, I will fill in this journal before getting into bed each day at my desk. I gave myself a time, I gave myself a place, and this is my implementation intention. Yeah. This is the statement that tells me when I'm going to do the thing. And sometimes having that written down and in an obvious place can be very useful. And I did find it useful for this. Do I actually do this? No, I do not keep this journal on my desk at all. I keep it next to my bed. So, really, this is a lie, but it was a good enough initial statement to get me to get in the habit of filling this in. And that's why it's useful. And that's why I recommend doing it, even if it's not necessarily the exact way the thing gets worked on, you know? So, Cute. We have. You don't have to plan a meal for a week at a time. Mind blown. Yeah, you definitely don't, because I know that for me personally, if I try, well, I still do it because Vogel likes it and he does the groceries, so I will allow it. But although we plan our meals on a weekly basis, oftentimes we get to the end of the week and we're just like, no. No, I'm not gonna eat that. But that's why I've gone to more of a flexible kind of meal plan as opposed to saying, like, on Monday you're eating this, on Tuesday you're eating this. I do it more so like, here's 5 meals for the week. We're gonna have them when we feel like having them because we've got the stuff on hand. So all goods. But hopefully this was useful. I am so excited for next year, and I am very, very hopeful that you're excited as well. And I hope that in working on your goals for next year, that these techniques help you, because I know that they're really helpful for me. Yeah. So as we talked about, 1, frequency buckets. Organize your thinking with those. 2, backwards mapping, right? Start at the end, work your way back, or, even though it's called backwards mapping, sometimes you want to kind of start at either end and meet in the middle. It's all good. And 3, make sure that you check your action steps to make sure that they are actually action steps. All right. If you wanted to join Epic Goals, we would love to have you. That one's linked in the description box. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Alrighty, team. Bye for now.